You said that forecasting for you is all about confidence. What did you mean by that?
The way I view forecasting is the confidence that as a rep, you're giving to the business. And that confidence does not stop or start at the calling of a number. It's a continuous motion. The ability to forecast consistently is actually the high watermark of a high-performing sales professional. And it's that ability to give confidence to the business in the numbers that you're calling, in what you're sharing, that really separates those different people from each other.
The need to find the fastest path to revenue has never been higher. As a revenue leader, being confident in the number you're forecasting is critical, and it has massive impacts on your business. To have confidence in your forecast, you need the right insights too, and that means working closely with revenue operations to get the tools, people, and processes in place. This is a special episode of the Run Revenue Show, recorded live during Clary's Charge event. Joining Kyle is an expert in revenue operations and revenue enablement. Jonny Fianu is the Director of Global Revenue Operations and Business Development at ComplyAdvantage. He's here to talk about the value that getting the forecast process right as an ops team brings to the rest of the organization. And make sure to stick around, because he breaks down how his revenue systems have changed to make the forecast as accurate as possible in the trying times of 2023.
Hey, Kyle, one quick thing, if I can grab a minute. What's going on, everybody? Devin Reed here, Sales Pro turned Head of Content here at Clary. And I want to take a quick second to invite you to our brand new virtual event. It's called Charge. Charge is a virtual event filled with thought leadership and practical advice for revenue pros who want to turn obstacles into opportunities, regardless of market conditions. This is a half-day virtual event that starts with a keynote. It has a leadership track, it has a practitioner track, and the content is highly relevant, highly actionable, and it's all about finding new ways to win in 2023. If you attend, you will get the blueprint for running revenue in 2023 and see what's really working in today's climate from the boardroom to the front line. Hurry up. Registration is completely free. You can sign up now. The event is happening on June 6th. Hope to see you there. Kyle, back over to you.
I'm Kyle Coleman, Sales Pro turned SVP of Marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special live episode of the Run Revenue Show. I'm joined today by my friend, Jonny Fianu. How you doing today, Jonny?
I'm doing well, Kyle. Thank you for having me. I always love our catch-ups and excited to be here.
Likewise, Jonny is the Global Director of Revenue Operations and Business Development at ComplyAdvantage. And today we're talking all about forecasting and revenue precision. We were talking last week and you said something really interesting to me. You said that forecasting for you is all about confidence. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, no, that's, to be honest, Kyle, that's really the way I view forecasting is the confidence that as a rep, you're giving to the business. And that confidence does not stop or start at the calling of a number. I think it's much, much more than that. Forecasting is a process. It's a continuous motion. And actually, I think even more than that, I think the ability to forecast accurately, consistently, is actually the watermark, the high watermark of a high-performing sales professional. And it's that ability to give confidence to the business in the numbers that you're calling, in what you're sharing, that really separates those different people from each other.
That ability to be precise in the way that you're forecasting, you said it's the hallmark of a really high-performing rep. I'd say it's also the hallmark of a really high-performing team. What is your role, Jonny, in making sure that you and your company are able to forecast with precision?
That's a really good question, Carl. And look, it's been a journey. The same way forecasting is a continuous motion, it's been a journey for us as well, right? We've had to ensure that our forecasting motion aligns to our sales motion, right? We've had to look at the different systems that we've had and how to either adapt, change them, or utilize them more. we've had to look at the data that we're consuming and producing. Ultimately, in this environment, in this macroeconomic environment, there's a sea of change, right? Deal cycles are longer, deal sizes maybe even smaller. You have way more stakeholders in the deal. Suddenly you're having to contend with all of these different pressure points, but all of these different data points. And so then the journey that we've taken is how to start to utilize that more. Everything from activity that we're seeing and the signals that those are producing, from the conversational intelligence, right, all the way through to calling that number and periodically reviewing actually what's the makeup of that number.
It's interesting. And you mentioned also in another conversation that the importance of forecasting is not just this bottoms-up exercise. As you said, it's this continuous motion, but another word you use for it is that it creates a culture of forecasting across your entire go-to-market engine. Talk to us a little bit about that culture of forecasting. How does that come to be?
Well, you start to see a change as you start to take on board this concept that it's a continuous motion, right? So some of the pieces that you begin to see, some of the changes that you begin to see is that those one-to-one conversations, those team conversations become much less about, opportunity or deal playback and much more about having very precise discussions around where to support and improve. Now, you start to see how that then starts to translate across the business. Everyone's coming with far more preparedness to those conversations, but also awareness of where the different deals are. And I believe forecasting is something that it's played all the way up, right, to your manager, the CRO, the board, but it's also sideways, right? It's across the business. It's to the BDR teams that are supporting you with pipeline gen. It's to customer success, right? And understanding what's actually coming down the pipe. So this is the sort of cultural change that you start to see. You start to see people change from being reactive to being proactive. You start to see an increase in data literacy and understanding, which I think is a shift that we're still going through. And a lot of companies go through it over a period of time. It's not just instant, right? We've gone from spreadsheets, to utilizing Clary, to utilizing more and more data across our sales execution stack, but it's a continuous journey.
I want to dig into that data point a little bit later because we're going to talk about the wrench that 2023 has thrown at you and how you're leveraging data to make those changes. But before we do that, you're talking a lot about how you can strategize with conviction. You're not just relying on the forecasting process to be this interrogation of your reps and just pulling information out of them. Rather, you're using these moments for real strategy. And another line that you had recently was that forecasting allows you to chart the line between risk and opportunity. Tell us more about what you mean by that and how that helps you strategize.
100%. And I feel that really does encapsulate what the forecasting motion is, right? You're trying to understand and minimize risk, and you're trying to capture and maximize opportunity, right? From across your pipeline, taking in all the different data points that are at your disposal, right? And you're constantly calibrating, right? And understanding, where is a deal at? Am I talking to the right people? What is their level of influence? What other considerations do I have, not only from my internal data, but also external as well? So you're continually looking at this line to really understand, what is the risk in the deal? Where's the opportunity? How do I minimize? How do I maximize? And that doesn't stay still. So there are points when you have to convey what that means to your business. You need to periodically share what your minimum expectations and what your overall expectations are to your business. But the concept of it standing still, it just doesn't happen. You're continually moving along this line to understand, okay, where is the risk? Where are the opportunities? And what does that mean? Can I eventually close this deal? How will that actually happen and come into fruition?
So how are you creating this culture? Obviously, there's a large enablement piece, and it's a lot of how the leaders show up. But how are you ensuring that all of your reps across, you've got a global purview. How are you ensuring that all the reps are thinking about forecasting in a similar way, are approaching things in a similar way, and that you're standardizing or governing the way that this forecast is happening across the business?
This is one of the most challenging areas, right? It's all very well and saying, look, okay, it's a process, right? You've taken the different data points. Okay, great. You have different systems that you can use, but practically, how do you ensure that you, as you said, teams are aligned? Okay, so the first piece I think is really the process. I think there's several elements here: systems, data, and process. But the process piece is really ensuring that you have a robust forecasting methodology that aligns to your sales motion, right? We use Medico, we have BMIMs, we have different namings and nomenclature, but really it all centers around pain and around stakeholder alignment, right? And so making sure you have a forecasting methodology that aligns to it, and that there is a cadence of communicating and understanding exactly what, as a rep, you're seeing, that art and science, right, of calling what that number means, but what is the data to support it? So the process side, I think, is a key piece, right? Establishing that not only in its framework, but also in documentation, in making sure you embed it with regular reviews, etc. Right? So that's the process side. The next piece is the systems, right? So as much as you can, you want to make sure you have one system where this information is kind of flowing through in an ideal world, but we're not in an ideal world. There'll be different systems that touch your different prospect and customer interactions. How do you start to make sure that that data is flowing consistently through? But yeah, importantly, Kyle, how is it surfacing the information to the rep at that point in time when they need to make that decision, right? Or when they're having that review, it's available to justify or back up or to explain why they made a certain decision or why they're calling a certain number. And then finally, it's around the data flow, right? It's making sure that data is present, the data is moving, the data is current. So there's different elements to it. The enablement side is a big part of it, making sure the systems are set up, making sure that there's training and there's governance around what you're deploying. The process side is a piece that, you work with management and with the individual sales leaders to embed that process and have it consistent. But then it's also constantly reviewing, right? You're not going to get it right first time. You're going to need to make some tweaks and changes. So having those regular reviews, Carl, for us, we really try and champion and promote the quarterly reviews with our AEs and BDRs. Hey, look, how did things work out last quarter? What have you not understood, or where can we get tighter, or where can we improve, right? We often put forward some different ideas, but the reality is that you need to have that feedback from the coalface to understand what's working.
Jonny, you are leaps and bounds ahead from most other revenue organizations with respect to how you're thinking about the revenue process, as you put it. You're running revenue like a business process, breaking down all the different components and sub-processes to really to make sure that you're optimizing every single element of it, which ultimately leads to the ability to produce that revenue precision that we started talking about. So I'm curious if you can take us inside ComplyAdvantage for a moment, take us inside the revenue process and talk to us. You mentioned your quarterly reviews. Other companies will call that QBRs, or some companies call it QBPs, quarterly business planning. What are some other revenue moments that you have that are sacred for you and for ComplyAdvantage? You have weekly calls, monthly calls. Take us inside some of those revenue moments.
100%. So what we found, we're a global business, Carl. So we've kind of taken this regionalized approach. So each region, there's not only C-suite and also the global leaders, but also the regional leaders that are responsible for various levels of the commercial process or different departments. So on a weekly basis per region, RevOps, CRO, our CMO, the marketing managers for that region, and the sales leaders for that region would come together, and we're aligning around, okay, here are our OKRs, here are our big bets, here is our forecast, right? And so each week we're going through, okay, what's changed, right? It's not really about, well, what is it? It's what's changed, right? Because we've got the systems and the data and process in place so that we can have now that much more proactive conversation, right? It's not, deal playback. It's, I know already there's these particular deals that need either greater support or alignment. What are we doing about it? Or how has our metrics moved on this particular key bet that we're making for a new region or a particular new area? So That's what we do at a sort of leadership level. However, that gets cascaded again on a weekly basis with the sales leaders and the reps and the AEs in that region and the BDRs in that region. And then again on a weekly or fortnightly basis with the reps individually one-to-one. So there's this cascade of leadership weeklies, leadership to AEs weekly, and then the one-to-ones. And then on a quarterly basis, we're looking back and understanding some key metrics that, we can now see in the system. Oh, look, what were the pipeline movements before and after, right? What was generated in quarter, right, that we didn't know about? What's that trend look like? How does that change like quarter to quarter, month to month? So we have this ability to be tracking as the month and as the quarter is progressing. And then there's a look back to understand, okay, well, how well did we achieve our goals?
There is so much to like about what you just said, Jonny. And I'm going to pick out one of the first things that you said that you started with, which is the audience for these regional leadership meetings that you have. A lot of people, when they think about forecasting, they'll say, oh, that's a sales exercise. That's going to be the account executives and the regional directors, VP, CRO, whatever. Leave it to the sales team to figure that out. But what you just said is that, no. There's a whole consortium here of revenue critical employees who can help move the needle on revenue and help us deliver on this revenue precision that we are promising to the business, giving confidence to the business. As you said, yes, it's sales, but it's also the marketing team. It's probably members of the product team are in there every now and again. The customer success team becomes really important. You have this big group of people. So is that the way that you're thinking about things, Jonny?
100%. And look, all of those commercial and revenue critical heads that you just mentioned, they'd love to be in almost every single interaction that they possibly could, right? Because this is a data point. This is interesting. This is helping them move forward in their own respective areas, right? But we have at the very least this weekly cadence, right? Where that is happening. And it's exactly as you mentioned, Carl. It's so that those teams can have a heartbeat on what is actually going on, right? And also how they can help and improve, right? This is all about us coming together as a company, as a commercial team to say, how are we going to collectively hit our number?
Yes.
Empowered by the systems that we have in place and the data that we're reviewing, right? But this is a journey. This isn't something that happened like day one. This has been something that it's been going on for months, years. It's something that we're going to continue to sharpen.
I love that. So you have the data, you have the instrumentation to be able to confidently answer the most important question in business, which is, are we going to meet, beat, or miss our revenue target? And importantly, it's not just a yes or no answer to that question. It's also, and then what? What are we going to do about it? What advantages are we going to press? What pitfalls are we going to avoid? And you're doing this, you mentioned this beautiful sort of weekly cadence that you have at the leadership level, cascading all the way down to the rep. And then you mentioned all these other moments that you have throughout the quarter, whether it's pipeline movement reviews, win-loss reviews, funnel views, and trend analysis, all of these different things. Now, importantly, you can't just snap your fingers and all of these things come to be and you're running a beautiful revenue operations org. So talk to us a little bit about that path that you are on, the kind of the maturity that you mentioned. Where do you recommend revenue operations people start if they're saying, okay, this cadence idea sounds good, but where do I start? There's so many things I could do. What would be your advice to them?
If I had to explain it or share it in one word, I'd say iterative, step by step, piece by piece. That's how you eat an elephant, right? You don't just do it all at one time. It's piece by piece, right? So this is the journey that we took, right? We were on spreadsheets. We had large commercial meetings with all stakeholders within just the sales area, all sharing deal playback, right? It's noisy, chaotic, not as much value, right? And we had to sharpen that, right? We had to sharpen that and start to separate out, okay, what kinds of meetings do we want to have? What are the participants? Who's going to be driving it? What's the actual outcomes, right? But that was aligned first with, here's what the forecasting process looks like. Here's the tenets that we're going to really try and drive, accountability, trust, integrity. These are things that are the sort of pillars around what you are actually forecasting. It's an expectation to the business. That has to be drummed in first, right? That has to set in. And then after that, you're like, okay, we've got a process now. People got a handle on it. You might still be working in spreadsheets or another system. Okay, now that we've got a process around and a bit of a motion, a bit of a muscle memory going, right, now let's look at the systems that we have in place. Let's think about, well, what is the best systems that we can use to forecast, to rally around stakeholders from right the way across the commercial org and outside, right? As you've mentioned, we have users from product going into Clary, looking at what are we calling. We have users from all the way across the organization. How can we look at a system which is going to support where you actually want to go? And then it's the data, right? You want to make sure that the teams are maximizing the data, right? And this can be external to the forecasting system. It can be external data that they're bringing in. It can be from all sorts of different areas, but building a sort of data literacy then starts to be a priority. How do you start to look at those data points and start to understand which ones are the right ones, right? To start pulling in that right ones to actually start to affect what you're actually going to submit. So we went through this journey, which was establishing a framework, principles, letting that kind of foundation set, then looking at the systems, choosing systems that we felt were best for our business moving forward, and then looking at the data. And that's a continual journey, right? To the point where then you have these meetings where the metrics are all known and understood. You can see the movements and trends, and it becomes quite tight, but it doesn't stop there. So
you used a phrase earlier in our conversation today, Jonny. You said it's the art and the science. And what you just talked through, at least my interpretation of it, is a lot of the science that allows for the art, that allows for the autonomy. But you mentioned accountability, trust, and integrity. That's super important words. And when you have this foundation of data literacy, when you have this foundation of the metrics and everybody understanding the metrics and what they mean, that allows for you to go into the more strategic part of the conversation, which is, okay, what do we need to do? What is the art of this deal that's going to allow it to get done? And that seems like a beautiful combination that you have created. But I want to go back to what you said earlier. You said, be iterative. And 2023, there's been so much thrown at revenue leaders such as yourself. So over the last few quarters, so talk to us a little bit about how have you iterated over the last couple quarters? What have you had to change given the macroeconomic environment?
That's a really good question, Carl. And look, as a business, right, we're not immune to the wider market pressures, right? We work in a regulatory, market that has its advantages, right? We've got a great product, fantastic product. We're continuing to move and lead the field. However, the macroeconomic environment is what it is, right? So what do we see? You're seeing like longer sales cycles. You're seeing deal sizes getting squeezed, right? You're seeing more stakeholders involved in the deal. You're seeing the CFO kind of reigning supreme, right? A lot of financial prudence being at the forefront. So we have to counter that in some way, right? And thankfully, this is something that we were doing, let's say, probably about a year ago. We're already looking at how do we start to build our qualification muscle, get deeper qualification in our conversations, right? And part of it is, being multi-threaded, right? That's a must, right? Having multiple stakeholders that you're engaging, understanding who they are, understanding both personally and professionally, what is the things that make them tick, right? And then engaging them in the right way, right? Understanding their pain, right? And seeing how you can align up your solution to it. So deeper qualification, making sure that we are multi-threaded from the very beginning, making sure that we align any of our solutions and what we're selling to financial initiatives within our prospect businesses, right? And so these are the sorts of things that you now need to do, right? They're kind of table stakes now. If you don't do it, you're just surviving, right? But as you well know, you want to thrive, right? You don't want to just survive, you want to thrive. And it is entirely possible in this environment, but you need to have this foundation, right? The table stakes, the line is moved, right? You can't not afford to engage in multiple people in the business. You can't, not afford to engage with the CFO, right? You can't not afford to have your sort of products and services aligned to financial initiatives within a business. If not, you're not going to be able to really sell into there. So these are sort of things that we've been doing. We've also been really, really deep into the data. Right. Chatting with your colleague Kat about this, mining the data underneath our feet, right? We've got a ton of data already. How can we start to utilize it? But the final thing is really kind of shining a light on the CS org. This is like a pivotal department now across the commercial function, right? And rightly so, right? It's easier to retain and expand on a dollar than try and find a new dollar, right? So, understanding where there's potential leakage, right? Revenue leakage, right? This is another area of focus for us. Again, we counter that by having guardrails around how we capture data, whether it's configure price quote or whether it's having rate cards and analyzing how customers are underutilizing or overutilizing. These are the sorts of things. I think there's no silver bullet, Kyle. I think it's a mixture of many different things that as sales leaders, we all have to just get really sharp and wizened to, and also reactive. I think agility is going to be the way that companies thrive in this environment.
Yeah, you took a word right out of my mouth, Jonny. I was going to say, it sounds like because you have the foundation of the process, the systems, and the data, you're able to coordinate with speed. You're able to actually make these iterations with agility. Like, without that foundation that you have in place, how the heck could you even do this?
Yeah. We wouldn't be able to move as fast. That's just the reality. It would be a lot slower. It would be far more reactive. We'll look back at this time, Kyle, in a year's time and think, wow, we were slow. You're able to bounce off the trampoline if you put in the structures like several years ago, right? Then you can really start to move and react to what the market is telling you, to what your prospects are telling you, to what best practice is now. But it required a lot of foundation setting to begin with.
And you're doing all of these things and you're changing these processes, iterating on these processes, I should say, which is building a muscle that you'll carry through when we get out of this downturn and we return to good times, and your company will be all the stronger and you'll be able to perform at an even better clip. So all of this work that you're putting in now, and you mentioned it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving in the short term, but also in the long term. And it's all based on the foundation that you are creating from a RevOps perspective.
Exactly. So this is it. And I heard stat around companies that maintain their share of voice from a marketing perspective, which I think you'll know very well, Kyle. If they maintain their share of voice in a downturn, the ones that do, they're the ones that really start to catapult when you get out of it, right? So it's a case of as tight and as focused and as efficient as you can be in this environment. Then when things start to open, well, then you really start to run. So yeah, this is the aim.
Incredible. Okay. This has been absolutely fantastic, but I have a bonus question that I always surprise guests with, which is, if you had to recommend a single book to revenue leaders or revenue operations leaders that's maybe informed your thinking, how you've put this systems and data and processes in place, any particular book that's been really influential for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I've kind of taken influences from multiple areas, right? I'd say from a sort of sales foundational perspective, one of the most influential books for me have been Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I know it's probably quite a popular one nowadays, but back in the day, it wasn't as popular. It's very new, avant-garde kind of way of thinking. And that's kind of laid my sort of foundation. There's also been books by Jacco van der Kuji. So he's done the Winning by Design. I've taken a lot of shaping around kind of forensically thinking about models and processes from what he shared and the SaaS framework. And then I guess the reality is, Carl, I've taken then pieces from not really any particular book, but just from people, right? Like yourself, Kyle, from Devin, from others who are just even starting out in this space, sharing their perspective around, okay, how do we tackle different things? And it's not even just on revenue operations. It'll be on BDR teams, right? Or SDR teams, which I'm kind of working on and working with now. It's a whole range of areas. I start to bring in those influences to shape my perspective. And then it's a matter of, okay, when I start to play that back, what do people say? So I can't give you one particular book, but I can say it's been a mix of influences.
Great answer, Jonny. Thank you so much. And you're totally right. It's not just about one thing that's going to be the silver bullet and then you can go do it. It's about being a constant student of all of these things. I love that you started with the Chris Voss book, Never Split the Difference. People may say, oh, that's a book on negotiation, but yes, and it's a book about communication. And there are so many lessons that you can take from that and apply to your business. And then more broadly, learning from those around you, learning from people who have done this before. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Like there are people like you, Jonny, you just talked through this whole system that other revenue operations folks could replicate and create a huge amount of success and revenue precision for their business. So thank you so much, Jonny. This has been an absolute delight. One more time, Jonny Fianu, the Director of Global Revenue Operations and Business Development. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kyle. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Run Revenue Show. We're going to take a little summer break for the month of July, but don't worry, we'll be back the first Monday in August with new episodes just for you. Have a great summer.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review.